Welcome to Young Money with Tracy Bissett, the advice show for young millionaires in the making. It's time for some $1 Million Straight Talk with Tracy, President and Chief Financial Fitness Trainer at Bissett Financial Fitness. Each week, Tracy's going to tell you what you need to know now at the beginning of your earning curve. Basic and advanced financial concepts made clear, healthy money habits and the missteps to avoid, and all the stuff that you can do to set yourself up for a future of fantastic financial freedom. Ready to lace up and start this week's financial fitness training? Let's do it, Tracy.
Welcome to the Young Money Podcast. I'm so privileged and excited today to introduce you to Ilana Ben-Ari. Welcome, Ilana.
Hi, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We're really excited for the show today and can't wait to hear from you. So to give my listeners just a little bit of background info, I'm going to read through your bio so I can make sure they're well aware of all your wonderful accomplishments. And so Ilana is the founder of 21 Toys. She's a multiple award-winning product designer, TEDx Speaker, and Ariane de Rothschild Fellow. She's been working at the intersection of design and social innovation for over 7 years and has been featured in The Guardian UK, Independent UK, and Time Magazine, and as I mentioned, the founder of 21 Toys, a multiple award-winning toy startup. She transformed her thesis project into the company's first product, the Empathy Toy. Originally designed for visually impaired students and their sighted classmates, it is now used as a tool to teach empathy worldwide. So I've had the privilege of hearing you speak several times, Ilana, so I'm very happy that you were able to come on to the show today. One of the promises that I make to the listeners is that they're going to find tools, tactics, inspiration, and stories to help them become future millionaires. And so one of the ways I think you can do that is by going out on your own and starting your own business. So I'd love it if you can give us a little bit of background on your company, how it came to be, and just a few details on that.
Sure. Yeah, and thanks again for having me. So I would say for your listeners who are listening in, so I'm still very much represent kind of those early stages, the first few years of starting a business. So I actually quit my job about 5 years ago, and I took a dare. I pretty much I believed really strongly that I could change education with toys. And that's because I was inspired by thought leaders like Sir Ken Robinson, who has a bit of an infamous TED Talk called Do Schools Kill Creativity? And yeah, I believe that toys could actually help us bring in creativity back into the classroom, because toys teach what textbooks can't, creativity, collaboration, and most importantly, empathy. So the Empathy Toy essentially was actually my thesis project in university, like you mentioned. And while I'd originally designed it for the visually impaired community, a lot of my testing was during the day was done with an elementary school with a girl who had visual impairment. But then I would actually at night test it with my peers, with sighted adults. And that's when I realized that the toy had so much opportunity. So it was just as challenging and rewarding for multiple ages and abilities. And I just kept kind of going back to it when I was working as a designer, which is what I studied. I was working as a furniture and lighting designer, and I just kind of kept saying, you know, there's something, we need to change something with our education system. We need to bring creativity back. And I think this Empathy Toy that I originally designed for the visually impaired community to develop communication and empathic listening could really be used in the classroom. And beyond that, I thought, you know, what if I design an entire category of new toys, teaching skills like failure, among others? Absolutely,
and certainly the implications to companies and the corporate workspaces are there as well, because understanding empathy and being able to communicate well, all really key critical success factors.
Absolutely, and we in our first year, so when I first started, I was very focused on education, and we're still there. So we're in about 1,000 schools in over 45 countries. Also word of mouth, which is pretty amazing. But we found that in that first year when we would go in to do demos for teachers, that it wasn't really a demo. We ended up actually running professional development workshops for the teachers, using the toys to talk about how communication and empathy and creativity plays a role in their work. And that's when it kind of validated what I felt when I was still a student, testing with my classmates, saying, I think there's a room for this. And so we're in a number of HR departments, talent and learning departments that are using our toys, not just for training and onboarding, but to develop their leaders. So they're using it to essentially make their core values of their company tangible so that their leaders can better practice, assess, and understand it. But we've even seen it being used on the other end, which is in job interviews, which I find kind of pretty wild.
That's pretty interesting, actually. I'm not sure how I would do if I went into a job interview with that. I'm sure I would figure it out pretty quickly, but I think that's a really good way to test people's skills. So
it gets quite funny. So it's always a bit of a challenge to describe it without seeing it, but essentially the way that the toy works is that it's a blindfolded puzzle game, where each player is given these set of abstract puzzle pieces with different materials, textures, and shapes. And one person is given a pattern that they then need to describe to one or more other people to recreate that pattern with their loose puzzle pieces. And the challenge is that everyone is blindfolded. And so in 5 to 15 minutes, you gain huge insights into how you deal with patience, frustration, but most importantly, how do you creatively communicate with another person. So the game is never the same. It's always different because it's a reflection of that group dynamic, which is why we say the ages are from ages 6 to CEO. And we're able to use it with anything from 2 people to 200. So we run workshops as well as not just the toys, but we run workshops and we also do training programs. So yeah, lots of insights. I'm definitely more excited about the education end of it, but I do find it quite fascinating. It's being used on the assessment end, which is, can I work with this person?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, my background is all in corporate, so I was a banker for many, many years, and so I think that certainly could bring a lot more creativity, collaboration, and empathy to the financial sector that was starting to be included.
And a lot of our initial interest when we started getting asked, not just from schools, but organizations, I would say banks, law firms, and accounting firms are some of our most popular corporate clients.
That makes sense to me. So I've had the opportunity to see your toys up close and personal and seen your TEDx Youth Talk where you do show some pictures and stuff. So I think our listeners will be able to go in to tune in to that after, and I'll make sure I put the details there for them. When you look back at your success, what are some of the key elements or key traits you think you have that led you to be successful?
So what I would say, first I think what's actually really interesting to me now is to be having a lot of these conversations with other entrepreneurs, which is actually, what do you define as success? So I think it's an interesting conversation for myself as well. So I think success for me at this point in my startup is I have a team. I'm able to pay them. They're on payroll.
Excellent.
We know that the product that we've developed, it's being validated that not only is it useful, but it's being repetitively used. Probably our biggest milestone is we've signed a few enterprise partnerships where with even just one of our clients, our toys are actually going to be used with over 40,000 of their employees. And so we feel like the market fit is there. The product is being validated. We've been lucky enough to get a lot of awards and recognition, so Time Magazine, as well as a number of other business awards. But I think for me, success is still not necessarily there. There's so much that I want to achieve in terms of milestones and growth. But what has been able to get us to this point in the last 5 years, I think, is a combination of this really interesting balance between being really, really curious and like leading your research through the lens of empathy, which just means what assumptions am I making when I'm designing this product, or what assumptions am I making when I'm trying to sell it to someone. Constantly listening for cues of what's working or what maybe I'm getting wrong or what I'm getting right, but then balancing that with this like incredibly optimistic, ridiculously ambitious confidence, which is, they don't get it yet. And I think a lot of designers kind of live with that juxtaposition of being both incredibly like humble and curious and wanting to just listen instead of defend. But in that same breath, knowing that there's that quote that is very much overused, and I'm about to use it now, which is that if you'd asked Ford, if you'd asked the customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, not a car. And so I think you're constantly living with that contradiction, and it's finding what is the balance of that that's going to really set you apart from other people, just in terms of believing in what you're doing, but also being able to change and pivot at the same time.
Absolutely, and I would imagine you have a very resilient streak in you to keep pushing ahead and keeping that optimism.
My joke with that is, I've been asked a lot similar questions, and I'm like, okay, well, what happened? And I like to say everyone in my family has an accent from somewhere else. I come from a long line of, I think, just like creative survivors. So people who are like, okay, new environment, new community, how do I navigate this? And so I think that resilience, and also just like that naivete of not knowing that you're breaking rules, I think I definitely inherited that from all my grandparents.
Excellent. That's very good and very motivational for people who are listening. Now, I've heard you speak a few times about bootstrapping, and that may not be where you're going to go with this, but what would you say from your perspective would be kind of your biggest revelation or aha moment when you look at your business from a financial standpoint?
That's a great question. So I would say, I'll start with, and I will talk about bootstrapping because something happened in the last year where I was introduced at an entrepreneur event as rich and famous. And they introduced me that way, and it wasn't a joke. It was very serious. And then that person got off stage, and I walked right up to them, and I was like, these aren't my pants. I biked to this event. I appreciate that. I was in the magazine that you read on your way to the airport, but that does not mean that I am rich and famous. And I think that there's this thinking that there's this, from the startup community especially, that you're supposed to have 10 employees and making hundreds of thousands of dollars in your first year, or you're not successful. And I think that going back to that idea of success, I've been bootstrapping, so I don't have any investors, both because I assumed not too many VCs would be interested in supporting an empathy toy startup, like a physical mass-produced product to sell into schools initially. And even now, when I think our business model and our finances are proving that there's a lucrative aspect to what we're doing, I'm not looking for investors necessarily, unless, there's conversations about maybe partnerships. But I think my measure of success is that we just hit our 5-year anniversary, and we're thriving. And 50% of companies don't make it to 5 years. And there's a multitude of reasons why, but a lot of it is, what I've seen in the past is that if you get that initial investment or that really huge sale your first time, you still need to be thinking lean, and you need to be thinking strategically. So the secret that I talk about is the idea of me, that these aren't my pants, I bike to this event, is a lot of entrepreneurs, if they're able to do it, don't pay themselves, or pay themselves just what they need to, cover food and rent. I would wish that there was a different way to go about it, but in those early years of building your business, it's really about survival, and that involves a ton of sacrifice, where I joke that being a startup is kind of like I'm a train station for money. So I'll see a salesman and be like, whoa, and then it kind of goes by my station, and I wave at it as it goes, to pay for toys and teams. And then it comes, and I hope it comes back. And so it goes back and forth, and I'm seeing it, going by my station, but it's not going to stop for a long time, because my strategy is building capacity. And the first thing I did with our first sale that we got was I used that to put the down payment for our first production run. And then I used the rest to hire teachers and coders and designers. And so I think the idea of bootstrapping is something I'm proud of, but it's really difficult. And there's a lot of challenges to it. And I think even when you get investors or a big amount of money, it's the long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think a lot of times it's easy to compare yourself to other businesses and say, oh my God, I'm so behind. When in fact, is this a 5-year plan, or is this, a 20-year plan? And your goals should be reflective of that.
Absolutely, and I would say from my experience as a lender in the financial industry, often small business owners and larger business owners underestimate how much capital it takes to grow, and you've got to be continually reinvesting. So just because you hit those sales doesn't mean you're done and you can be coasting if you want to be growing the business.
Not at all, and so many, especially when you're doing a physical product, more sales means you need to buy more products.
Absolutely.
And so I'd never heard the term like a revolving line of credit. But that's something that now I'm thinking, okay, how do we build that into our business so that, we don't face this like huge financial stress every time we need to pay for production. So what are other interesting creative ways that we can fund that, not just through sales of toys?
Hello, Young Money listeners. You know that I love to talk about cash flow on the show. This episode of Young Money, featuring a fantastic entrepreneur, is sponsored by the masterclass, Can I Afford It? How to be certain of what you can and can't afford in your business in 5 minutes or less every time. This training has been specifically designed for entrepreneurs with sales in the 6 to 7 figure range to provide the 5 steps to cash flow clarity. If you are an entrepreneur with sales at these levels and want to make powerful money decisions, you do not want to miss this important masterclass. Head over to visitfinancialfitness.com/afford to register now. Stop asking yourself the question, can I afford it? So as you've hit your 5-year anniversary, you're probably reflecting back on kind of the early years and how far you've come. Maybe you could give us 1 or 2 aha moments you had from a financial perspective over that time, and maybe things you hadn't thought of that kind of then came up really quickly as you were running your business.
Trying to think of what would be really obvious, but I found out that maybe your listeners already know. So...
Were you all about the numbers?
Yes and no. I think I was forced to be about the numbers because my entrepreneurial story is really, it's a bit unique in the sense that I started this business not thinking it was a business. I was thinking more, I have this toy and I want to make more toys. What is the vehicle that I can create that will allow this to come into existence? And so the way that I saw sales was just, that will pay for the production. Like I didn't think about it in the same way that initially I'm building up this really large business. And I think like the first thing that I did, so I tried to start the company in Montreal, then I tried to start it in London and Helsinki. I had a lot of disappointments and then ended up moving to Toronto because my best friend had said, hey, live on the couch. And you can sneak into my office. And I had to be on her couch for 6 months. But at that point, I'd spent, the rest of my savings on trying to get it off the ground in those places. So I didn't have almost anything left. So I would actually break into education conferences. I would by volunteering or just walking in. And I would leave my prototypes on tables and then walk away and see who was interested in coming up to see them. And what ended up happening is that an education consultant saw the toys. And then I mentioned them to a school board he had a very good relationship with. They found me on Twitter, watched the TEDx talk that I did on how I designed the toys from student to where it is now. And they said, hey, can we get this? And I said, sure. And they asked how much it was. And I essentially looked at how much does it cost me to make, which was over in the hundreds of dollars. And I said, okay, it's going to cost me this much to make, so I'm going to have to charge at least about double. And I told them this price, and they said, oh, okay, well, what if it's at 30? And I was like, okay, so I can reduce that a bit. Yeah. And ended up negotiating with them purely just based on the cost that it cost me as opposed to really looking at what the market would bear. And that was my first thing. And then when they asked, I said, great, can you pay in full upfront in 6 months? And the reason I asked that was because I needed to find a factory and commit to production. But I think I naively just discovered that a lot of our customers were willing to pay and wait and really support us in the initial stages of that journey, which I think is a huge reason why I haven't had to go to investors by being able to exist off of people prepaying, and then a few reward loans that have helped us build out. And yeah, that was really surprising to me. I think a few years later, being like, wow, that was pretty bold to ask. Like, I would not have thought to ask that.
It was extremely bold.
It was, and I think I knew it was bold, but at the same time I was like, well, you want this to exist, and I want this to exist, and there's no other way for it to exist, so this is how we're going to get it made. So I think, I don't know if I wouldn't feel as comfortable doing that now as I did back then, which was interesting.
Well, sometimes, though, the best things happen when you don't know what you're supposed to do. So always important to keep in mind. So just a couple other questions before I let you go today. So when you think of people in your life who influence you and inspire you from a financial standpoint or perspective, who would you say that is? And is it somebody who's in your life that you know, or is it somebody you admire from afar?
That's a great question. So not to not a comment on my family, but I definitely didn't look to them for any financial advice. I think something I needed to unlearn was actually a lot of my parents' mentality, which I think is totally reasonable, which is this idea of never spend money you don't have, which I actually think can be really, it is both quite responsible, but it can be really dangerous for someone starting a business because you have to use money that you don't have when you're starting out.
Yes.
So I actually have to kind of unlearn that. I mean, I would say just the way that actually we connected is through this organization, CEO, and I think with some of the insights I've gotten from other female entrepreneurs that I've met through that community has been really interesting. Just some ways to understand value. So how can you leverage what you have so that you can, build more? So anything from bridge financing. So I've looked at some other entrepreneurs who I know that I was saying I was like, oh, I'm like $10,000 short for what I need to go into this production run. And then they were like, well, like, who's in your network? Who do you know? And I was like, oh, there's a few people. It's like, okay, be bold. Contact them and tell them, hey, can I have, a $5,000 loan interest free for the next 6 months and see what they say? And I was like, that's crazy. And I think the being bold and looking at money as a tool and a vehicle for you to get to where you're going, definitely being responsible. I'm so adamant on making it very clear when and how you're going to pay people back. But as long as you've got that under control, I think it's completely shifted my thinking towards what does it mean to ask an institution, a person, or a customer for money for you to be able to develop or launch something. I think that's been like a huge shift for me. And I think the next one is just looking at, what are loans and what is a revolving line of credit and how can I think about money in this fluid way as opposed to this, like, you have it, you don't.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful, and I'm really pleased to hear all your insights. I like the fresh perspective because I was sitting on the side of the banker for so many years. Sometimes you start hearing the same sorts of things, or people are not as comfortable to tell you what they're thinking. And I think this concept of being bold is really important, as well as the being serious about when you're going to pay people back, because if you do go and be bold and you make that ask, it's pretty important that you pay them back when you say you're going to pay them back. Or the market's pretty small, people are going to find out, people are going to talk about it, and so you're really protecting your reputation.
Absolutely, and I think, I had this really interesting scenario where for a second person I needed to do that, and I ended up getting two people from the entrepreneurship community who helped with bridge financing. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm literally building credit with them. So I have to, and I'm really, it's so important to just lay that out. These are the installments. This is when I plan on paying you. And then if you can't, communicating, hey, that's going to be late. Luckily, I didn't need to do that. But instead of building, you're trying to build credit with a bank, and that's, I find, a really difficult thing to do for a small, medium-sized business. Whereas for me, it's like, well, what kind of credit can I build with my community that maybe is in a privileged position or has the ability to support kind of my short-term financial roadblocks so that they can support that. Essentially, if they know that I'm really responsible and I'll pay them back, then if I do need to try to use that again, I literally feel the same way that I would with like a bank, which is like I have a credit score with that person.
Absolutely. And I think that in time, too, that may lend itself to help you when you do go to a financial institution, because you may have some people who may want to support you in that journey, whether they become guarantors or they give you letters of reference or something like that so that they can speak to that credit you've built up with them.
Absolutely.
So maybe possible. So last question, and I know our listeners are going to want to find out more, so maybe you can tell us, what are you working on next, and where can our listeners go to learn more about you and 21 Toys?
Great. So I'll answer the easy one first. So our website is 21toys.com, so it's actually the words written out, 21 Toys. But if you Google empathy toy, you'll find us. That's probably the best way to find out more about the toys and what we're doing. What's happening for us next, I'm really excited about. So the two big launches we're working on is expanding our toy collection, you would say. So that's a joke. We're called 21 Toys, but the two is silent. We're one toy company. And I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish with the empathy toy. We've not only essentially now become key parts of a lot of organizations' training and development programs, but we're also having some really amazing impacts in schools. Specifically, we had this 21 Leaders program actually developed by a high school in Winnipeg, where they were able, because the toys, they reduced the conflicts in their schools, kids getting sent to the office for bullying and racism, but they reduced that by about 85%.
That's tremendous.
And which is amazing. And I think right now our business model is we sell toys, so any teacher, facilitator can use our toys within their own lessons and workshops. But we also run workshops ourselves. So essentially you do it with the toys or we do it. We can come in and run workshops. And so we built out a facilitator cohort with about 15 contractors. So we're scaling that part of the business model because we're getting requests from all workshops in one day. So my team could be in like Chicago, or I was just in Calgary yesterday. So that's really exciting. And then the last is training. So right now we can only do in-person training, or we do kind of over Skype, online training. But we're in the midst of launching a more robust online training, like self-directed learning, where anyone who gets a toy, that comes with level 1 training, but you can also get additional supports on, let's say, how you want to maybe use the toys for design thinking, or for hiring. We're trying to look for those modules, and we're going to be putting that 21 Leaders program actually online, which is amazing because that kind of builds the roads, not for the empathy toy, but for the next toy that we're launching, which is a toy that teaches failure. So the failure toy we're hoping to launch in 2018.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, you are a busy lady. I can tell that you're around the globe, everywhere, doing training and development and all kinds of great things. So thank you so much for joining us today. I know I'm taking away, and I'm sure our listeners are too, some of the key things you mentioned that I'm taking with me are to use money as a tool and a vehicle to get you where you're going, which I think is really critical. The idea of being bold and asking people to help you when you need it. And along with that, being credible and following through with what you say you're going to do, especially from a financial perspective. It's really important to build up that credibility. So thanks
for having me. This is great.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Stay financially fit, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. To all you millionaires in the making out there, if you love this podcast, please subscribe on iTunes to keep your financial fitness training going. Oh, and leave us a review. And be sure to visit 2 S's, 2 T's, financialfitness.com to take your free financial fitness assessment. Find out how financially fit you really are. See you next week, young millionaires to be.